The DIESOL podcast.
Developing innovation in English as a second or other language.
Episode 68, Antisocial Language Teaching with Dr. JPB Gerald.
Welcome to DIESOL. This is episode 68. We are your hosts. I'm Brent Warner.
And I'm Michelle Reyes. Hey, Brent.
Hey.
Happy return to school, I think, for you.
Yeah. Stepping in. We're in our preparation week, but yeah, it's, summer's been long and it didn't feel long, but anyways, here we are back to classes.
Back to classes. So we have Dr. JPB Gerald today with us. If I don't know how many of our audience listened to one of our, it's been 2 years now since our episode with, at the time, JPB Gerald, now Dr. JPB Gerald. But we have him on the show because his new book, Antisocial Language Teaching, is coming out in just about a month. Justin, is it about?
It says December 30th.
Okay. So pretty soon you can pre-order your copy so you can get it right as it, hot off the press. But here we are.
Yeah. So congratulations. I mean, JPB, since we last talked to you, as Esol says, you've gone through quite a few pretty major things, right? Like your life is probably very different at this point than it was 2 years ago. I don't know if you want to kind of just do a brief rundown of what's different in your life.
Yeah. So I came on here, I think it was September of 2020. I think, I don't know, it might have been August. I can't quite remember. But it was about 2 years ago. And, you all had spoken to me because my article, Centering Whiteness in Language Teaching, had come out and people were talking about it and you found it interesting and so forth. And, I wasn't close to graduating. So didn't even have a clue what I would do when I finished. And then, last year in 2021, I was writing the book because right around the time that I spoke to you, a publisher approached me. It took them 3 months to agree to publish the book because everyone in the world is very slow, especially in academia. It takes people so long to do everything. But anyway, so I was writing it last year, and then I was writing a dissertation, and I was still working, but I was like, I don't like this job. So I was looking for a new job, and obviously I still have a son who, obviously, I was not the one breastfeeding and all that, so I wasn't the 100% caregiver, but still I was doing my part, and to do all of that at the same time was a lot. But aside from my son, who obviously is still around, all those things change. Since then also. So I went through a period of intense pressure, and now in this period where I finished the book, although they keep emailing me every few weeks with one question, and I'm just like, would you just publish the book? I don't there's a figure in the book, the taxonomy that I created early in the book, and they're asking for a caption for it. It doesn't have a name, it's just a figure. It doesn't need a name. They keep asking me for a caption for it, and so I was like, okay. So I made up a name for the picture, yesterday. So the people who read it will see it published as The Central Paradigm, but I just made that up. So anyway, all that happened, and now I'm in a place where I have a job that I feel comfortable with, and my son continues to grow, and now the book's about to come out, and I don't even know what's going to happen after that. So.
Lots of cool stuff happening. Yeah. So when we first met you, Justin, Brent and I had a conversation on what we needed to be doing, where we needed to be going in the field of language teaching, and all of the issues with anti-racism and where to start. And so that's where Brent sought out knowledge and found your article. And I know that one of the moments I will always remember is when Brent said, "Oh, he seems pretty active on Twitter." He just responded. So, and then from then on, it was just, I think I'm happy to say that you're a colleague. You're in the field and you're pushing things forward. And for those of you who don't know, Justin teaches a class. Are you still teaching it? You're decentering whiteness.
Well,
Are you doing cohorts?
Honestly, I'll put another one together whenever people are interested. I just haven't done one. I've been busy.
Right.
But so, I haven't retired. So.
Yeah. So we'll throw that in the show notes too, just in case you happen to have another cohort. But Brent and I took that class, and it was I would say for me, it was something that I wish was a part of every TESOL curriculum. It's just a part of the foundation and how we approach language teaching and an anti-racist approach. But anyway, all that to say, I'm pretty excited to have read your book, the one without the caption on that paradigm. And I've got a few areas that resonated with me, and then hopefully we can talk about those. And then Brian, I don't know.
Yeah.
If there was anything you want to tell our audience.
Yeah. So, I've got a little bit of my own perspective because I'm a white male teacher, cis, hetero, straight, all, kind of the standardized
Orange
thing.
County.
Yeah. Very, very Orange County boy, as you guys know. I mean, this is kind of the joke we keep going through, but taking your course, Justin, has been actually it sticks with me for, the whole, these, however long it's been since we took it. I think that was about a year ago.
Yeah, it's been about a year.
I think we did the interview, and then about a year later we did the course, and then now it's been about another year from then. It really has. And so part of the reason we really, we wanted to get hold of your book and talk to you about that is because it's stuck, right? I felt like a lot of times in your course, I was I am blinded by the things that I don't have to deal with all the time. And so it's just, what do you call it? Horse blinders, right? You don't see what's outside. And so that was a real struggle for me and continues to be a struggle for me too. When we're talking about the things that we don't recognize, especially when I am by default centered as this white guy, right? And so this has continued to be I don't know what to phrase it as, an issue or just something that kind of continues to come up with me. So I agree with Esol that a course like that should be part of the training from the beginning, because even if I didn't know how to answer your questions or challenges directly at the moment, still a year later, I'm sitting on them, reflecting on them, thinking about them, trying to make differences. And so that's been a really interesting thing. And then coming together with reading the book here too, there's so many fascinating parts that I just think are worth, hopefully we can touch on a number of them. Obviously we have a limited amount of time, but I think we want to jump into the book. But before we do anything, and Esol, I hope you don't mind if I do this, but
not at all.
There's a quote straight out of the book that I think is important to, just put out there for anyone who's listening and isn't totally sure what's going to happen or which direction, because JPB, you are willing to confront people's thought processes, I guess, on a lot of these things. And so I wanted to read this quote that I liked a lot from the book. In your words, I say to you that if you are ever unsettled by a new idea that troubles your understanding of your work, the issue isn't your discomfort, but whether or not you attempt to apply pressure to halt this evolution and soothe your discomfort accordingly. And I really like that, because it's a beautifully phrased way of saying, sit in your discomfort, challenge yourself, make sure you're thinking about it and not just kind of going, well, I don't like that, and so I'm not going to respond to it, or I'm not going to listen to it. And, we always want to do our best. And I think the listeners to our show, are always trying to expand their thinking and their options and those types of things. But I wanted to put that quote out there as just a way for people to start thinking about, just being open-minded to different ideas or things that maybe they haven't heard as we start talking about some of these points here. Esol, I'm going to let you start with where you'd like to go.
Okay, no, I actually wanted to go back to that quote, because this is, again, and a lot of it goes back to the class. And of course, now working with teachers, I'm in charge of teachers. How do I approach everything that we do, knowing that we all have those blinders? And also, I don't know, there's just so much there. I think you said an issue that keeps coming up, and I think that it's it's a practice. We constantly have to practice this, practice this, practice this, practice this. And anytime we are unsettled by something, it's that is saying something about ourselves. It's like a mirror. And that's sort of what approach I take now. Whenever something unsettles me, I have to sit with that feeling, that discomfort or that jarring feeling, and try to figure out, okay, what is it that is telling me about my biases or about my preconceived notions about the way I'm judging something, and why am I judging it that way? What is it saying about me, and where did it come from? And so it helps me to be a little bit more empathetic toward people. It helps me to be a little bit more willing to listen rather than react, because oftentimes that's, even though people might consider me pretty open-minded, that doesn't mean that I don't have biases or have fallen, I would say, have fallen to in the book, Justin talks about how when he was in Korea, one of the regretful, or I would say regretful moments, is that the accent reduction issue. And as I'm reading, I'm thinking, oh, I do that too. I hate the word accent, the terms accent reduction and intelligibility. And then how many times have I had to do a pronunciation mini lesson, and then having to navigate, how do I present this to my students, and what am I really teaching, and how am I really wording, what's the proper way? And so that's, I guess, where in the book where I see myself as some of the areas that Justin mentions in teaching English in Korea.
Yeah. So just we're dropping a ton of different areas.
I know. Like we do have an interview with Justin.
Yeah,
he's here
Justin
somewhere.
has something to say. Well, actually, I would like, Justin, for you to start with. The title of the book is Antisocial Language Teaching, right? And can you just kind of set us up with a little bit of the premise and a little bit of the reasoning for the title and what you're trying to achieve with this book?
Okay, I was wondering if you guys were going to let me say something.
No. You're just going to listen to us for an hour.
Just like, I was like, clearly this is the time for me to, nope. Okay. So antisocial language teaching, subtitle, English and the Pervasive Pathology of Whiteness. The pathology is the important word there, because antisocial, and a lot of people use that word in a couple of different ways. There's a colloquial way of saying I'm antisocial, like I don't like to go to parties and stuff. That's not really what it means. I'm not trying to be a prescriptivist about language here, but in terms of what it actually means, is that like being asocial is I don't want to be introverted, I don't want to go out, whatever. I'm not saying introverts aren't social. Introverts don't yell at me. Being antisocial is being like against like society and society's rules and all that, right? But so why did this come up? I saw a Tucker Carlson episode where he was talking about Black Lives Matter protesters being antisocial thugs. And I'm like, well, that's weird. Not the thugs part. Yeah, of course they're going to say thugs, but I'm not, people understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's good that he's doing that. It's just, I'm not surprised he did that. Right. People stop it. But that's antisocial, because like now they're referring now, because this has happened more recently, that people are referring to antisocial personality disorder very colloquially. Antisocial personality disorder being basically the actual clinical definition of what people say, like sociopath, right? Like you can't go to the hospital and they say, oh, you're a sociopath. That's not a thing. That's not in there. But they might diagnose you as antisocial personality disorder. And I thought it was interesting that he said that, because that's basically the worst thing. Like they can't diagnose you worse than that. And so to be using that to describe protesters, I said, now that's interesting. And I went to look at the definition of it, and I said, huh. And then truthfully, I was just writing an essay about the diagnostic criteria of antisocial personality disorder and whiteness and disability in general, and the ableism involved in what the diagnostic criteria are. Diagnostic criteria, English. And then the publisher approached me, but they're a language publisher. And I was like, well, now what? But I had this essay I was working on, and I had this idea, and I thought it was viable. And my advisor was saying, pursue it. And the language publisher, and I was like, well, and I got the idea to really think about the way that language could fit into that, because ultimately what I was writing about was about whiteness in general. And the point I was making was that as long as X is centering whiteness, you will see it show up in the way that people are classified as disordered and in need of fixing in that field. So when you think about the way that people in the language field don't like to talk about race, then you can see where that gap needs to be filled, because then in terms of an organizing feature like race, whiteness, and that sort of thing, you're going to get people who don't want to talk about aspects of it. And you're going to get people who are not particularly comfortable talking about aspects of the field. So, I basically am trying to use the diagnostic criteria from the DSM to both make fun of the APA, despite the fact that it has APA citations, which is funny. That's funny to me. But not just the APA, but the APA is a representative of society and the beliefs that society has, and then map that onto language teaching and its connection to whiteness, which obviously would be connected to racism and so forth. All of that sounds complicated. The point is just that we need to decenter whiteness in language teaching. It's a much longer version of my article.
Yeah, I found that an extremely compelling way to read it, though, by looking at it in like, oh, okay, here's an aspect of English language teaching, right, of our field. And it felt like in reading some parts of it, it felt like you kind of said, well, I could have gone in this direction. I could have gone in this direction when talking about this particular criterion, right? But then you just kind of said, like, here is a way that we can understand the failures, the shortcomings and failures of ELT through the psychology, through the DSM lens, right?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was saying that, but the way that our field is organized, not even thinking about whiteness, we, for reasons that I don't love, are often thinking about what's wrong with people's languaging.
Right.
And then you get into, we're not medically diagnosing people, but we are pedagogically diagnosing people as needing help in some way. And even people who have plenty of degrees, and I'm not saying we should do it differently, people who don't have degrees, people who are very accomplished, credentialed, whatever, we do the same thing. If they're in an English class, right? My brother-in-law just came back, immigration issues, just came back from Guatemala. He's in pre-English classes. He doesn't want to go back. He said, they don't explain things to me the way I need them to explain things to me. And it's just like, because they think that they know better than the people know about themselves. And that's what I think is the main crux of the issue, is that the industry thinks it knows better about people than people know about themselves. And therefore denigrates the culture, the race, the identity, ability, etc. of the students, and some of the teachers too. But yeah.
Yeah, I liked the term, and some of us have heard it, but some in our field might not even like. You got into some interesting points inside of there about like the idea, especially like teaching English as a foreign language, so the people who are overseas, and it's like, oh well, the criterion for you to teach here is you're a native English speaker at whatever level, and maybe more ideally a white native English speaker or whatever that is, or sound like a white native English speaker. And so I like, so one, you use this term languaging. So like the idea of like to language as a verb, right? And I'd like for you to just touch on that, because I think some people listening might not have thought of what that means and kind of how you tend to use it here. And then also how does recognizing that idea of like what it means to language, how does that affect all of us, I guess?
Yeah, so at least the way I understand it, because like any of these things, I pick them up from the scholarship I read, right? Mm-hmm. Is we think of language as a noun, and by that I mean not just literally in the grammar, but I mean in the sense that we think of it as a static thing. And it's actually something we live and breathe and do. Our language is not just something that exists, it's something that we exist within, or something like that. I don't know, and I'm getting confused by my own metaphor. But so by that definition, as opposed to the boring one, how can the way you language be wrong? Like the only way I think your language can be wrong is if you are intending to mean something and you actually say something that you don't mean. But that can happen even if you're in your quote unquote native language. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that someone who says the wrong word is deficient. I just mean like, if the point is for you to communicate, then you have not communicated what you want. And that is something that you, if that's a common issue for you, could choose to want to correct if you want to. But I don't think it's for other people to say, I didn't understand you, you're bad. And I'm oversimplifying, but I really don't think that the industry is all that different from that.
So another, I sort of want to go back to something that there's a term in there that you use. So when Brent have had episodes on this before, on just the fact that we're constantly trying to find some kind of acronym that, or something to describe how our language is now inclusive and more accepting. And so we've gone from ESL to ENL or EAL or all of these. And you threw in one that I'd never heard before, which is MLL, or multilingual learner, for a multilingual learner instead of ELL. But really, and the quote that I highlighted was, it doesn't really matter what you call people if you treat them the same way you've always treated them. And there's little evidence that our language ideologies have shifted substantially. And this is where I think Brent and I constantly, we talk about, the terms we use to describe things in our field. But this is exactly what your book is doing, is bringing out, highlighting that the issue is we haven't changed the approach. We have not, our language ideology is still white centric, and I don't know what else to say there.
Well, I 100% want to follow up on this, because our department right now is having this very conversation about like, let's change it from ESL to MLL or whatever it is. And I really struggle. I mean, we've talked, I think this was actually our topic on episode number 1, right? It was like all the different acronyms and what it is. And I do struggle with it. And actually, JPB, you came up with a term that I liked and was interested in. I continue to struggle with the bigger picture, which is, this might sound dumb, but I really do think it's important that we as teachers in a field are able to find each other, and with 100 different acronyms and like, hey, I want to find information on decentering whiteness in ESL, and it's like, no, there are articles only on ESOL, or like whatever else it might be. And I think that itself, just in terms of algorithms, is problematic, but also, but of course, like having this conversation and understanding what is our field and how do we even know how to define it. And so I know this conversation's coming up soon in my department of, let's change the name. And And Justin, if you could share, your suggestion for the term, I thought it was very, it was one that stood out to me and does seem to actually lend itself towards making a difference, or at least the way that people think about it. If you could share a bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah. So before I get to that acronym, to just sort of encapsulate the acronym discussion, is like the whole point is that, like, I think it's kind of like renaming the streets after Black Lives Matter, right? Or Juneteenth being a holiday. It's like some people will get up in arms about those surface level things, saying, that they don't mean anything. And I'm not trying to say that choosing a more inclusive acronym is not better.
Sure.
Right? But there is this idea, and I don't know that this particular idea is white, just impatient, that like once you've done, and I'm very impatient, so I don't know if that's a white thing, but is that like once you do a thing, that's the accomplishment. You did a thing, right? So I think it's an easy win, right?
Sure.
And then you get people who, the acronym changes, and then they'll go through every document saying, got to change all acronyms, and that's like someone's job. Like there's an acronym person, and I'm not, it's not even like a joke, because I had an internship in Sports Illustrated, which I was really bad at. And one of the things I had to do was change the curly quotation to the straight up and down quotation. So anyway, but I said, but like you said, Brent, we have to say something. What are we going to call ourselves, right? And I do think that the many minuscule differences between types of language educators, I think the acronym is not a big part of that division, but it doesn't help, because if you are any kind of English professor, you could say, I'm an English professor. I teach 18th century British literature, right? I'm an English professor. I teach, contemporary American literature, right? But you still start with English professor. But for us, it's like, I'm a language person. No, I am an EL. And it's no, I am an ESOL. And like, I am a linguist. It's like, look. What is going on here? We don't need to do this. I think we go with our specialization before we go with the broader concept that we are language educators in some capacity. And to the point where if I say, even though my day job isn't even a language educator job right now, but like, even if I say language educator, people will be like, what do you mean? Right. So anyway, so what I came up with was Teachers of Standardized English, TSE. There's a lot in the book about the concept of standardized English and how it's silly to pretend that there isn't a standard, but we also can't pretend it wasn't fit. Like, just as I say in the book, we can't just be like, there is no standard. It's like, but there is. It's just that they made it up. So it's unrealistic to completely pretend that there isn't some sort of expectation. That doesn't mean that the tests and all the stuff around it is okay. But like, we can't pretend that there aren't forms, commonalities, so forth. And I think sometimes when people hear what I say, they think that I'm saying that. I'm very clear in the book that I'm not saying that, but you know how people react to things. But anyway, so by saying Teachers of Standardized English, or TSE, first of all, say we're teachers. Although some people are like, no, I'm not a teacher. I'm just like, relax. But by including standardized English, you're saying, first of all, the truth, which is to say that like the forms you're putting forth are a design chosen standard, right? the I's. And therefore, you could theoretically put standardized American or whatever, but like still, you're saying you're teaching standardized English, and then people understand what you're doing. Like, it's the same as what they're already doing in EFL jobs. So, I don't necessarily think that people, I feel like sometimes it's easier for them to change acronyms that have nothing to do with them, right? So changing the acronym from MLL to ELL, whatever, because they're just talking about the others.
Mm-hmm.
But like when it comes to them, the acronyms take a lot longer to change. So, and like the certification, right, takes a lot longer to change than the acronym. So you still get people with the ESL certification in New York, right? That's not the teacher's fault. That's just what it's called, right? Hunter, the school I went to, still calls it the ESL. Like, our ESL teachers do X, Y, and Z, but that's because the law says that. That's what the certification says. So I do think it's important to change the acronym. To me, I was thinking about this today. It's like a cake with icing. A lot of people just want to change the icing, but the cake is still poison. On the other hand, nobody likes a cake without icing. Like, you just need to do both.
Yeah, I was thinking about that terminology because when you change it to standardized, right, it to me it stands out in the same way. About the minority versus a minoritized person, that conversation. I think you even bring this up in the book too as a parallel here, which really does, or at least for me, and I'm assuming people who listen to are language nerds, and kind of that affects the way that they and we all think about what it means, right? And so when we say, okay, well, it's standardized, right? Not standard, but standardized, then it's like, okay, it's been put into that position, has been created into that form as we understand it. And that, to me, even on a small level, is like, okay, that's something that I can think about a little bit every day, right? When I talk to my students, I can think about what that means, and then hopefully help me understand that the way that they are talking or producing language, a lot of the students want to get to standardized English, right? That's another conversation by itself. But at least for me, it helps me put a different framing around the conversation or around how I might be talking about language acquisition and in the day-to-day with the students. I don't know, Esol, if you felt that when you've changed some of your language as well, or Justin.
Well, at least I'm still stuck on the whole acronym thing. And, when you present what you teach to others, like I'll say I'm a language teacher. I don't say I'm an English language teacher anymore. I teach English. I just say I'm a language teacher. And right away they say, what language? And I'll say English. And they say, you teach English? Wait. Oh, and then it's like their perception suddenly changes because they initially thought, oh, French or German, or oh, but you teach English, so you must be teaching a particular population. And then the way that the conversation goes is different until I start telling them, okay, well, until I start giving details. But still, just the fact that alone, I can just see how they react to me. Oh, you teach language? What language? Oh, English. And so I'm stuck on that. And I guess one of the things that you mentioned in the book, Justin, is that even though we have all of this, it's a great mountain to climb. And you talk about how you have hope. You have hope for all of us who are latching on to that desire to change and to stand up against what we have been taught to teach, or the way that we've been taught to accept language, and working together that we can build a better paradigm, that we can have that shift. And so I think, I guess one of the questions I have is in looking at authorities out there, or quote unquote authorities in our field, for example, Big Tesol or Mother Tesol, or sorry, not Tesol, Tesol. We have Mother Tesol and Big Tesol. Have you seen changes that are that you like in our field? Because I know that in the book you talk about the response a Big Tesol had, right? And so that Brent and I had a conversation on this too, and so I'm kind of glad that it's in there.
That's a special issue.
Because we were so excited. I remember Brent saying, "Oh, Tesol's got a statement." And we go and we look at the articles and we're like, "What?" So has there, since then, I know that you've been pushing forward and you're part of a committee now, but are there changes that that are promising in your opinion?
It's funny because I just think Tesol might be too big to change the direction of the cruise ship. They're just gonna scrape against that iceberg. It's like they know they have to turn. They don't have enough time. But like, I think I've seen a lot of energy, I guess online, but when I go to any conference, when I went to that conference in New Jersey, like that was the first time that like I was just the keynote, which is to say people weren't coming to see me. There might have been a few people who came to see me, but like they went to the conference and I was just there. Very rarely. I mean, that's happened a couple of times in webinars, but like you'll just sit and watch what's on your computer screen. So that doesn't really mean. So then, and this was the morning, so I was like breakfast man. I was like breakfast. The breakfast keynote. So they had to get up, right? In the previous couple of days, like they've been there. This is like the end of the conference. So anyway,
scones and racism together at last.
Yeah. So I was really expecting people to not respond to what I was saying. And it was well received, and that was like a general. I mean, yes, New Jersey. I wasn't going to like certain parts of the country, but like certain parts of the country wouldn't invite me, so it wouldn't matter. So like I gave that talk, and like there was one woman who just wasn't getting it, but she wasn't hostile. She started by saying, I'm a music teacher, or I was a music teacher or something, and in music school they teach the classical music, and that's like a lot of old dead white guys. And I'm like, oh, he's about to make the point that she agrees with me that we don't have to base everything on that anymore. And then she goes, but there's a reason they teach that. And I'm like, oh no. But still, she kept talking for a while. And because people don't think about their questions beforehand, so they just talk until they get to their question. And I'm just like, would you just get to the anyway? And she gets to the question, and she finally is saying like, it was just so asinine that it was pretty easy to respond to. And then I saw her later, and she came to my breakout session. She was really like trying. It just wasn't happening. But that was the most resistance I got. And again, she was clearly uncomfortable, but she was trying. And for that to be the worst I got, I'm saying I see that, in online and at conferences and stuff like that. But with Big Tesol itself, look, they put a committee together, and there's good people on the committee. But like, my job technically has a DEI like thing, but I've barely heard about it because I feel like the places that do a good job don't need to rely on their committees that much to do that work. So like, I feel like the places that are really excited about their DEI committees are the places that don't really want the DEI committee to do anything. But they're very, very excited to talk about their DEI committee's existence.
So the idea that, hey, we have this thing, we can present it. Don't look behind the curtain.
Yeah, just leave us alone.
Yeah, we pushed a couple buttons when some of those conversations were happening early on, and Michelle in particular, you got yelled at on Twitter a few times for,
I get yelled at on Twitter a lot.
And it's a strange thing to see, I think, because of theoretically the nature of our field. And again, you break this down quite well in the inside of the book, but theoretically, theoretically, like, it's supposed to be open-minded people trying to do good things for people or for other people, right? And long sections of the book, like the whole first section, really does an excellent job of breaking down, and like, I mean, we can't explain all of it, but you do get into that quite a bit, where it's like, hey, your intentions versus what you're actually doing and participating in, knowingly or unknowingly, are
harmful.
Yeah, they're
harmful.
Yeah, it really can be harmful. I think, and I'm glad to hear you say that people are trying to listen to you and understand, but like, where do you think people get caught up the most with this, right? Like with the idea that, hey, I think I'm doing a good thing, or I believe in what my field, like trying to help these people succeed in America or whatever country, with English. In your thinking, what is the place where people, the road bump that people can't get past, I guess, or at least to start with?
Well, I think, there's a lot of research on like racial identity development, right? I don't like most of that research, but it exists. And so there's like frameworks for how different people develop their racial identity and their opposition to or their embrace of racism. And one of the things that a lot of the frameworks have in common is that people get stuck when they have to re-examine their own past behavior. Right? One of the hardest things, I think, with the whole, I believe in doing a good thing, is that when you get enough knowledge to understand what you've been complicit in, everything you did before that looks different.
Absolutely.
And, you can end up with a lot of regrets. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it. like, you can't really go back. I say this in the book, but it's part of the reason I wrote the book. Because, once I learned about the language ideologies and the expectations and the things I would correct them on, where I would say that they weren't doing a good job on this or that. I look back and now it's like, I wouldn't say any of that. And those students are not going to read the book. Although one of my students I did see, but that's the only one of the 1,000 kids I taught in Korea. So I'll ever see. But, I feel like people who are teaching, especially if anyone reads the book, people who are doing the EFL thing, I think that they are really thinking about what they're doing.
I have to say, as I was reading, I saw myself in a lot of what you said too, because I was the model Mexican immigrant student who did better than the others, who did everything she was supposed to. And then I just perpetuated that upon my students, like, that they're not working hard enough, they're not studying hard enough, they're not mimicking hard enough, they're pronouncing this wrong because they're not paying attention. And later, when reality hit me and I accepted it, I realized would never say that. Oh my gosh, I hope my students never. Thank goodness I never cared very much about pronunciation. I hated teaching pronunciation. I hated it because my mom's been judged for her accent and treated poorly because of her accent. And so that was always an area of high sensitivity for me. And but I always knew that when my students were misunderstood by my white counterparts and the English teachers, I would get really angry because I could understand the students so well. And I would just say, well, you're not used to their pronunciation. And it's something that I think somewhere, I forgot which chapter you talk about accent, and that we are putting the burden upon the person with less power to be able to recreate that or the ability to be understood, whereas the one who really lacks or has that lack is the one who's got the power. And we're not, I don't know if I'm explaining this the way that you explained it in the book, but those people aren't doing anything to try to understand those with what we perceive as accents, and knowing that everybody has an accent.
Yeah. I kind of like that. I like the accent chapter a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the funniest ones.
We should point out there's we'd mentioned this before, but there's so much humor, and it makes the book very enjoyable and consumable. When sometimes it's like sometimes my heart hurts a little bit because I feel like I'm guilty of something you're talking about, but then at the same time you kind of make it fun and accessible too. So
you've got to read the footnotes.
Yeah,
read the footnotes.
I'm just so annoyed that they put the footnotes at the end of every chapter. They were supposed to be under the page, but they put them end of the chapter, so you got to flip like 7 pages to read them. So
I was annoyed by having to go look, which one was this for? Which page was it? Oh, okay. But they're worth it. It's worth it.
It is worth it. Yeah. Sorry. Back to the accent reduction section though, because it is a great topic.
Yeah, I mean, so that was a thing that I wrote about. That I did myself as a teacher, and I used my phone. This is in the book, but I used my phone to record them talking to do Siri instructions or whatever. Right? You know what? I didn't have an Apple, but whatever the other thing, Google. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And it would do talk to text, and it would put out the wrong thing, right? And I knew what they were saying, and I would show them that's what I thought. And we would all laugh, and I don't think they were offended. We were all having a good time, just showing up and so forth. But in a way, I didn't even interrogate the fact that but I understand them. So why doesn't the phone? Why is it built in a way? Why did I have to go be a teacher for several years to have the level of understanding that I do of almost anybody's accent? And the phone isn't even going to try. I mean, now, I think that the phones are a little bit better because they have more voices in there. But the story is from a decade ago. So,
well, they're still struggling because my wife has an accent, and she every morning tries to get Alexa to turn on the living room lights, and it never. She has to do it 2 or 3 times every time. And it's like, is there machine learning going on in here? Who's defaulting this programming to understand whatever language it is? 10 years ago and today, it's not fixed for sure.
Which is interesting because Alexa in my sister's home can understand my little nephew's Alexa, play, whatever volume, whatever. And he started doing that at a very young age where I couldn't really understand, but Alexa understood him. So there's got to be somewhere in there something that's learning. And I have to say that this last trip that I took to Japan, the issue came up with my teachers that I was training, trying to use Siri as part of their pronunciation aid. And I had to tell them, look, when you switch the voice over to the Japanese voice and you say what you're saying, it understands you. It actually types it out, but it doesn't understand my English. And when you switch it to British, it's going to understand one version of it. And so you've got to remember that simply because it doesn't understand you doesn't mean you're not seeing it in a way that I understand. And it's the first time that I've been able to do that with, because now technology is maybe more advanced in that sense. But still, I like that you mentioned in the book that, all of that is one type of standardized English. Whoever is putting that language in there it's just one type.
Yep. It's only, we could call it computer English or phone English or something like that, and I think it's going to take us a while to get rid of this stuff. So for the time being, you might as well label it accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we've got a limited amount of time left, but I did want to point out that the end of the book is, like everybody's like, well, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Like in order to make this? And you have a lot of good sections inside of there, including the TSE, like the teaching standardized English. And a number of other things. But I wanted to just, for you, when you looked at these numbers of solutions and things that you can do, I think the one that stood out to me as it's going to be a long-term thinking, a mind puzzle for all of us. But I did like that you had a quick section on what did you call it? Shifting classroom power. That was the last section, as you're saying, hey, here's a number of things that you can start doing. And you readily admit you don't have all the solutions to it, which I appreciate. But can you talk just for a minute on what does it mean to shift that classroom power, and how do we kind of balance that out a little better?
Yeah, the funny thing about that is that, I did the free article series in Language Magazine that was about all of that. And I quoted the first one because when I finished the draft of the book, I'd only published the first one. And and then when I was editing it, I was like, I could go back and get more for the others. I don't feel like it. So I didn't have to. But I think that it's hard to describe shifting the power because, like, if you're the kind of person who needs a roadmap to think that you should have less power, then you're not really probably going to inherently do it correctly. But people like that should still try. So, thinking who's reading this? Is it someone who's like an authoritarian person but is trying to change the way they're doing things? Or is it someone who's, already on their path and just needs a little extra guidance? And towing that line between the people who, like, I don't tend to write for people I'm trying to hard convert to what I'm saying because they don't really want to listen. And if they do, great. But I'm trying to give you any people who kind of already agree with what I'm saying. And so, that's, I dropped the microphone. That's just, I think that all of this is about power. That even the fact that I get to write this book is about power. Sure, there are certain ways that can be excluded from the center of things, but still being a person who has a command of standardized English and certain passport means, and a degree now, means that there's certain people who wouldn't listen to me if I didn't have that. And I'm trying to use, I don't know if I would call that power, but I'm trying to use that influence or the potential influence responsibly. And I think that that's the same thing that I'm hoping the teachers can do in the classroom itself, is to say, to acknowledge that you do have a certain amount of power. Whether you would like that or not is true. So how can you use that equitably while still understanding that you ultimately are in a powerful position?
Yeah, and I think that really stood out to me too, is like, use your power wisely, right? Do your best, and then keep trying to do your best beyond that at your next steps, right? So JPB, there's so much more for us to jump into, but we know you're out of time and limited here, and have to go take care of Esol. But we are really glad to have you here on the show again. I think you're the first person to be a second time guest. Is that right? Yeah, nice.
I think so.
Congratulations. That's a big win. But yeah, we're gonna jump out real quick and make sure that everybody has a way to find you.
All right, it is time for our fun finds. And this time around, I have Affirmi's Adult Affirmation Cards deck. These are 50 positive affirmations for people who like to say the F word. So I carry them at work. And when someone is having a bad day, I pull out a card and I put it on their desk. And a lot of it is to sort of get them out of that framework of you're at work doing this and you're a slave. No, you still got to take a moment, pause, breathe. This job is not everything. It does not define you. And so I like to leave those. Yeah, they're fun. And so far people have enjoyed them. I haven't gotten in trouble. Brent, what do you have?
I'm just going to go quickly with the new Predator movie called Prey on Hulu. It's pretty cool. It's been getting quite good reviews, and so I did go and check it out. I like the original Predator, but then it got real weird. But this one was an interesting one because it went way back to Native American history, and I'm bummed I watched the English version. There's actually a Comanche language version of the film apparently, but really cool, interesting story about how this young woman was interacting with the world as well as the Predator, of course.
Yeah, and she's native. She's a native actress.
Yeah. It's cool. It's worth checking out. Justin, what do you got?
I don't know if to say a new film, but along the same lines, like Reservation Dogs just came back, and also on Hulu. And I think that there's something I'm noticing about the show that, to me, they have very different lives from me. Mostly the ruralness of poverty and so forth. But then we've seen so many stories of urban poverty. And we've even seen like white rural poverty, which I feel like is a little bit different from theirs. And, just in the second season especially, just we're getting a better glimpse of the fact that they're really young and struggling. And I just feel like that is something that different groups of people has not been traditionally allowed to be shown as on screen. And so giving a full back into the whole conversation, just trying to show a different part of the marginalized identity. Not just showing a part of it that is in the central part of the culture that people don't know about if they're not part of it.
Very cool.
Awesome.
You could win a one-of-a-kind DIESOL pin by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. If you're giving us a shout-out any other way, tag us on social media. We're on all the platforms.
We're on Patreon. We're at, you can find the show notes here at diesel.org/68. And of course, we're at VoiceEd Canada as well. The show is, I think we're most active on Twitter at DieselPod. I'm at Brent G. Warner.
And I'm at Ixie_Pixie. That's IXY_PIXY. And you can find Dr. JPB Gerald at
JPB Gerald.
All right.
Easy enough. Justin, before we leave, what obviously the book's coming out. Where can people grab it?
Well, I think probably to Google it, because at this point I can't imagine that many things title. But it's Multilingual Matters is the publisher. So if you go to the Multilingual Matters website, you can order it there. You can pre-order it, and if you order it by September 30th, which is the day it comes out. So if you pre-order it, you can get a discount, but you have to ask me about it.
Nice.
Get yours.
Dr. JPB Gerald, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody else, check out the show notes to find out where all this information is.
And Maltese, thank you is grazie. Grazie for tuning in to the DIESOL podcast.
Thanks, everybody.